International human rights lawyer Amal Clooney called the conviction of Rappler CEO Maria Ressa an affront to the rule of law, a stark warning to the media, and a blow to Philippine democracy. Vice President Robredo warned the public that the conviction has a chilling effect on all freedoms of ordinary Filipinos. While the verdict was handed down in the middle of the pandemic and on the heels of the debate on the anti-terror bill, it is time for all Filipinos to ask, what is at stake with the right of the people to information on matters of public concern? We discuss this in this episode of the Chiefs. Welcome to this special episode of the Chiefs, and of course with us right now our News 5 Chief Luchi Cruz Valdez, and joining us in a while will be Ana Marie Pamintuan of the Philippine Star and Robbie Alampay of One News. Bossing, good evening and happy Monday. Oh, we are not getting any audio. There you go. There you go.
We're not?
Yeah, we are now. We are now.
Yeah, happy
somebody's
Monday.
coming online. It's Robbie.
There you are.
Hello.
Happy Monday. Yeah, apat na araw na lang.
Bakit underdressed kayong lahat? Hindi na kayo nahiya sa akin.
Yabang mo.
Sige nga.
Big day. Hindi, big day. Ang guest natin ngayon. Medyo maganda ang topic natin ngayon. So, yeah. No, but I'm also back in the studio. So, first time, if you want to ask me about traffic, marami na ako pwedeng i-report sa traffic sa inyo.
Alam na namin ang traffic.
Ito ang scoop. Traffic.
No kidding. No kidding. I've been telling you that for the past 2 weeks, But we have two big stories today. Of course, the first one is Maria Ressa's conviction earlier this morning, and the other one, probably a little bit later tonight, will be the expected announcement of the president on whether we continue with the GCQ or we move up or move down to either an MGCQ or back to MECQ, if I remember correctly. So we will know by tonight what happens tomorrow, kung luluwag tayo o hihigpit.
Yeah, right. So let's start na.
Okay. Let's bring in, para we have lots of time to talk about these issues. Let's bring in our first guest for tonight is, of course, Maria Ressa, the CEO and the executive editor of Rappler. Maria.
And of course, the newly convicted journalist.
I never thought. You know what I mean? It's like
really
first.
No, really, Maria. I mean,
criminally.
But I'll take that as opening, Maria. Really, you never expected? I mean, or in all honesty, was this a surprise at all?
Not a surprise. I mean, I was preparing for the worst case scenario because you have to, right? In the situation that we're in with everything that's happened. But still appalling, and when we quickly skimmed the verdict, very anger inducing. And of course we walked right in and talked to the press after that. It's expected in that sense, yes. But now, what the trolls were saying in 2016, she's not a journalist, she's a criminal. Well, it took 4 years later, but the justice system now actually echoed this kind of insidious attack on social media, and it's weakened press freedom. I mean, imagine, look at that, right? We were in court today at a time when we're debating whether or not the lockdown should be put in place again. This was fast, and we seem to be a test case for a lot of things. So what can you say, right?
Okay, Maria, before we proceed with the principles that I know you hold dear, can we just ask you a few basic questions about how you forwarded your defense in court? Basic question would be this. Why did you not allow yourself and Mr. Santos to stand as witnesses?
So I'll speak on my behalf, right? Because I think in something like that, you should talk to Ted, because this is ultimately also our lawyer, Ted, his decision. But imagine this case was filed 1 month after the government tried to shut down Rappler. We had our license to operate revoked. And then this case happened. And then that same month, Pia Ranada was banned from the palace. And then we had a slew of cases in 2018, 11 in total in 1 year, right? So at that point, one of the things I realized was that every time I participated in some kind of government hearing, my words were being used against us. Anything, like you say yellow and it would be turned upside down and it's a new case. You know, our tax evasion cases, there was actually there wasn't any work done. And again, I can't go into so much detail because obviously these things are still, there's sub judice. I spent 2019, 90% of my time was going in and out. Of course, there were weeks I would go to 4 different courtrooms in a week. You know, so for me, aside from the fact that I actually had nothing to do with this article because I run the business, I run tech, I run maybe some, I set the strategic goal, but Gloria, our team runs runs Rappler. So I knew nothing about the story, and that was part of the defense. And what's so interesting to me is how the judge decided without really even asking, or the judge decided that my title was actually a clever ruse.
Yes.
Right. I mean, I actually want to know. I mean, well, and let me not go there. You know, but
Maria, there were other things that the judge said that we would like to ask you as well. Of course, we want to talk about the issue of press freedom, but before we get to that, I want to ask you about specific points.
Ray, can I
I'm
ask?
sorry?
Can I tell you about Rey? You asked me about Rey and why he didn't testify.
Yes.
So
Why?
In order to bring this case to court, the law can't be, cybercrime law can't be retroactive. In fact, the NBI lawyer actually threw that out for the first time in a week. Yes, right. But in order to do it, what they actually did was come up with this novel idea of continuous publication.
Republication.
Republication. And that was essentially a Rappler saw a typo error, so changed one letter in one word. And then the court, to bring it to court, then they said that, well, you republished this 2 years later. We pointed out that there was still a TRO on this law that we supposedly violated, but that didn't make a difference. It's nowhere in the verdict, I think. So Rey was no longer with Rappler at that time. He wasn't involved in a supposed republication. So why should he testify?
But surely he could have been subpoenaed. And I too faced a libel case when we were together in ABS. I'm not in ABS anymore, but I'm still being subpoenaed for it.
But this is different. Again, the context of it, right? Every time I spoke or anything that wasn't material, there was a fishing expedition all the time. And that was the context of 2018. And that's why you can't take the cyber libel case on its own. Because in the full context of that, the fishing expedition was on all fronts. It was almost like when President Duterte attacked Rappler at the State of the Nation address, a week later, I got the first subpoena, and then it was open season. It was, attack Rappler, and it's legal. Weaponize the law against them. And I think the end goal truly was to arrest me. And they did in 2019, right? I was arrested twice in a 5-week period and detained once. The first arrest for this case, the cyber libel case, it was incredible. They came to the office at near 5 p.m. so that I couldn't go to court to post bail normally. But I knew at that point that there should be a night court that I can post bail in. But they made it.
I know, but Maria,
but it's the same old tactics, diba? I mean, I think we're all used to. We all have our libel cases. We all know to expect it on a Friday, and so on. But going to Ed's point, we do want to talk about the principles. We do want to talk about the context here. I agree with you. I think it's unavoidable. Beyond the legal arguments, there's no way you can avoid talking about the context of President Duterte having it in for Rappler. But
actually, for media,
I would say, but on the case first, if you don't mind, I do want. I mean, in fairness to the case, with regards to William Keng, their argument and government's argument right now is he's a private individual. He's a businessman.
Yeah.
There were defamatory elements there. I mean, the story basically said he was linked to drugs, to human trafficking, murder, and so on.
Granting of fake
And
visas.
the judge makes a point about questioning about whether or not Raptor treated him fairly, specifically supposedly depriving him of his right to air his side and to have a clarificatory story. What's the story there? How was it laid down in the hearings, and what was your response to that allegation that you never gave him his due?
Read the story. He did respond, and it's a public interest story about a Supreme Court, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, who was under impeachment trials at that point in time, using resources by businessmen. And actually, if you look at it this way, it was more the connection to the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. That's what the story was about. And Rappler didn't make this up. There was an intelligence report. Aris Rufo has deep sources. There was a group of at least 3 to 4 different people who worked on that piece. And the end goal of that was actually, as it was in 2012, it was the looking for the activities of the former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Let's talk about.
But you did have one of your reporters write what was supposed to be a rejoinder or a statement representing Keng's position on the case. What happened to that?
So I can only tell
Why
you
did
what
that not see light?
Because some of the documents needed to be verified. I've heard the lawyers say this, right? So I can go in, but again, I didn't know a thing about this story, and when I get 11 cases thrown at me in a full year, I didn't really look at this because on the face of it, this case shouldn't even have gone to court. This is legal acrobatics to get it there. But in this particular one, Keng's lawyer's position is that they gave a PIDEA a document clearing
Yes,
him.
they did. And
We all
NBI,
know,
yes.
let me again go back, right? It depends on which intelligence agency you're dealing with. And we all know which intelligence agencies, and I won't specify because I don't want to be libelous, but I wrote an entire book based on intelligence documents. Some intelligence agencies make things up and some intelligence agencies don't. We all know that there's been a matrix that supposedly came from intelligence. And here's a drug war, big sheaf of paper that supposedly came from intelligence. I think
but Maria, I mean, you know how it is in the newsroom. We make it a very basic move to just get the other side. How could it have hurt you to just publish whatever Keng's side was? Why didn't you do it?
I think,
If
well,
it
again,
meant
I think
actually being able to prove that you were being fair and balanced.
I think, again, you can go back. I don't think this is an issue about fair and balance. I don't think this is an issue about being a gatekeeper of journalism. I think this is a press freedom issue. I think it is a legal harassment. It is politically motivated. But let me go back and just answer that one, Lucci,
Yes.
right? It isn't as clear cut as it's made to be. You can look at the full records of the court, and I can send them to you. It's certainly portrayed very simplistically to be just, he wants to change, he wants to protect his reputation. But my question there is, did it take 5 years to want to protect your reputation? It was 5 years after the president attacked Rappler, and after we got our first, essentially our license to operate was revoked by the government. And if you look at I don't want to attack Mr. Keng because I don't really have, I understand why he may do it, but I question that. And I still look at, instead of words, I look at actions. I look at context, I look at patterns. And
Well,
it's kind of
Maria,
like,
Maria, a lot of people will agree that it is a press freedom issue, but at the same time, there are points of vulnerabilities that may be found in some of the things that happened along the way, in the last 8 years. For example, the judge herself, at least from her end, says that is questioning the truth of the story that links Mr. K to all these things, murder, drug trafficking, and so on down the line. Of course, we're no strangers to using intelligence data, intelligence information, but sometimes it comes back and bites us in the ass if we don't have anything in black and white, which is
yeah,
almost impossible too. But diba, when you quote
yeah.
from an intelligence source, then it becomes problematic in itself, and you are vulnerable.
Mm.
So I'll answer that and I'll talk about libel in that one and whether Mr. Kang had a chance to respond. If you read the article, he actually does respond because our reporter talked to him for that article. He responded to that article and he talked about the SUV. The second point is actually about libel, right? Technically, libel doesn't turn on the failure to give the other side a chance to rebut. It doesn't constitute malice and it doesn't actually make the article libelous. This is what's insidious about, so I use that word again because that's been used so often, but this is why I feel the verdict tells you it's kind of like a magic trick, a sleight of hand. Look over here. In the meantime, over here, the fire's burning, right? So I think in this one, let me put it this way, because I know that like death by a thousand cuts. I will stand by Rappler the same way Rey is standing by his story. I know the people, you know, the people I work with. We do know how to work with intelligence documents. We don't do matrix the way the Duterte administration does. And in this particular case, while I understand what Mr. Kang says and I acknowledge it, I would suggest that actions speak louder than words. 5 years after the story, on a story that was published before the cybercrime law was actually enacted. And even in the supposed republication, a TRO was in place for the
Okay.
cybercrime law, right?
Maria, I agree. I see what you're saying about, there's a potential sleight of hand here where you have the bigger issue of what are the implications of this case to press freedom and free expression. And then you have uh, people trying to concentrate on and trying to say that, no, this is a private case. This is a private matter
Which
that's
it's not.
legitimate.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I guess that's why we're going down this path first. I want you to make it clear um, how you make how you make that argument that this is not about a private case. How do you because
For the
people, as Ed
individual, you
said,
mean?
people will look at this and it's very easy to grasp the private interests of Mr. King. But how do you make that argument that it's beyond that? What are the concrete connections that will make it very clear to the public, your narrative that no, this is actually not about Mr. Keng suing Rappler. It is about President Duterte attacking press freedom. How do you make that clear connection?
Sure, I'll give you three actions, right? The legal acrobatics to bring the case to court. Imagine
Mm.
changing the period of prescription from 1 year to 12 years. Imagine a novel creation called continuing publication. This novel idea of continuing crime is something that's been used against many perceived enemies of President Duterte, including Anita Llanes. Anyway, those are the two things. But oh, it's noisy there.
Yes.
But the other part of this is who litigated the case, right? It wasn't there was an army of lawyers on the other side that included the Department of Justice, the prosecutors for the government. It couldn't have moved forward without the Department of Justice pushing it forward. Um, Even interesting to me was today at the actual, this is a minor court, right? This is before the Court of Appeals, and we have the Supreme Court kind of involved in the press conference that we gave today. The PIO was the one that gave you your copy of the verdict itself. And then I said it said three. Let me add a fourth. Again, I will go back in 2018 after the president said that the essentially opened the floodgates for open season on Rappler. In January, we lost our license to operate. We kept fighting it. But of course, just like with ABS-CBN, a minor regulatory agency that should have been an administrative charge takes something and pushes it to the exponential degree. Some of the companies, including some of the ones affiliated with you, were given a year to change something far worse. Let's just say if there was something in that case. This one, they shut us down without giving us the ability to actually talk about it. This is the way I feel about this case again. Find a plausible reason, a narrative that can work, and then bring down the gavel, bring down the hammer. I can go to jail for 6 years for this typo. And then you look at some of the things that were quoted in the verdict. Tulfo wasn't jailed. He wasn't convicted. He was fined, right? So there's definitely special treatment.
Yeah.
I'm really tired of the
I
special treatment.
I'm glad you brought that up. I wanted to ask Maria, were you surprised? I mean, the Supreme Court in a circular series of 2008 actually has that guidance that acknowledging that libel is a criminal offense in the Philippines, at the same time acknowledging the harm it does to press freedom and free expression. The Supreme Court since 2008 has given guidance to the lower courts to basically ignore the option of imprisonment and just use the penalties, the fees, the fines, and so on. Were you surprised, along with your counsel, that basically there was no mention of that guidance, and the court basically ignored the guidance of the Supreme Court on this?
I think the court ignored a lot of things, and that is part of the reason that we're adamant that we will appeal it. And I thought that the judge in this case was professional, but at the same time, when I look at the verdict, um, there's so much in this that I think sets a bad precedent. It codifies abuses, deep cuts to press freedom, and turns it into a law. This court doesn't have the ability to do that. So this is part of the reason I think we'll take it up. But I'm not a lawyer, right? But the same way that the judge is not a journalist, and I think it's also really funny. Well, I think it's really funny that she basically said the journalist's testimony. Our head of investigatives is Chai Hapilenya. She said it was, non sequitur. She bypassed it the same way that she called my title a clever ruse. I could actually.
But Maria, in the end, the judge, the DOJ, including even your critics, will go back to pointing to the fact that back to the question of whether or not Keng was really under surveillance for drugs, for human trafficking, whether he was really involved in murder. So it will in the end have to go back to, unfortunately, whether or not the story was written as it should have been written.
Yes.
From your perspective, could it have been written better and more carefully if you, at least in hindsight, were proper protocols taken with respect to publishing the story?
I
Kasi
think at the time,
in the end, the
I think
judge and Keng and lots of other people will say, totoo ba o hindi?
Yes.
Sa huli,
I think
dun
at the
babagsak
look.
yan eh.
I think at the time it was written, the story was 100% accurate. And again, as a public interest story, I also found it interesting that the judge placed less, on a journalistic issue, she placed less emphasis on the journalist's responses. And again, like small things, you can see it in the verdict. Having said that, there are deep issues that are legal that need to be addressed. And it also seemed to show a lack of understanding between, what actually is the role of a free press and where are those lines drawn.
Yeah, I do want to get into that, Maria.
I have to go, guys, because I have a 9 o'clock, and that's why they're zinging, and that's why they're zinging. I'm supposed to. It'll be 5 or 6 minutes, but I think I'm at the top of the hour somewhere else. I could come back to you, but then I have a 9:20, and then I have a 9:40. So, um, can I just say, please, all of the questions you have, I think that, again, we can nitpick an issue, but this is very similar to the PDR case. The PDR case makes it seem like there's a justification that there is foreign ownership. That's not the case. You look at the reality of Rappler's, the founders of Rappler have both economic and editorial control. Having said that, this is modus operandi, and you can't look at it without that context. I can take apart with you guys, since you are news heads, we can take apart everything that we did. We'll stand by what we've done. But death by a thousand cuts, by misdirection, we've been through this before. I hope you also look through that and then look at the way this decision will impact not just journalists, but our democracy.
Okay, maraming salamat, Maria Ressa, at
Thank you.
ingat, ingat
Sorry.
parate.
Sige, maraming salamat, guys. Nice to see you again.
Good to see you.
Okay.
Okay,
All
we'll
right.
just pause for a break. Please stay with us.
Welcome back to the Chiefs. We're now in the final stage of our conversation. Joining us are Attorney Ryan Cruz and Attorney Melissa Andaya, legal counsel for businessman Wilfredo Keng. Attorneys, good evening.
Good evening, sir.
Okay, sir, let's jump straight into it. Your case has succeeded in convicting Maria Ressa and Mr. Rey Santos of cyber libel. This is a landmark case. As a journalist, I have to tell you, I'm very much worried about some of the implications and some of the things that you laid down in your case. Tell us why do you think, beyond Mr. Keng, as lawyers, as defenders of the Constitution, what can you say to reassure us that this will not have an adverse effect on press freedom, on free expression in the country?
Okay, if I may, the issue here, I think it has to be cleared. This is not an attack on press freedom. This is a simple case of holding someone accountable for not living up to the standards of ethical journalism. We have consistently said that our client was maliciously attacked or maligned on an online publication. And if you can see what happened earlier, right after the conviction, did she go to jail? She did not. She held a press conference and then proclaiming that there is a government conspiracy against her. How has press freedom been affected by that? She still has the pulpit. She can still go on TV and continue speaking. Of course, there's a conviction, but she still has the process of going on appeal. As far as I'm concerned, the Constitution has not changed. The Bill of Rights has not changed. The right to freedom of expression and speech has always been protected. And the jurisprudence regarding libel has also not changed. It has always said that libel is not protected speech. You commit libel and it's proven in court, then you will have to suffer the requisite penalties.
Okay, here's a very basic question lang. Why did
Yeah.
it take you so long to file a libel case? Why did you have to wait for 4 to 6 years?
Okay.
I mean,
That has been again asked, and we have answered that. But I think um, instead of just looking at the time that it was filed, let's look first at what Mr. King actually did. According to Mr. King, when the articles came out, he tried to look for intermediaries to Rappler, but apparently he did not do that.
Sorry, there's too
Uh,
much noise. Okay,
sorry.
sorry. Yeah, okay.
Fortunately, um, he finally got the services of attorney Leonard de Vera, who at that time happened
Yes.
to know Marites Vitug. So that was the connection. That was the first real and possible way for them to get in touch with Rappler, especially at the time when, after the administration has already taken its taken office in June 30 of 2016, when President Duterte was inaugurated as president, and then he made it clear that he will be really tough on drugs. And then you have this article saying that Mr. King is involved in illegal drugs, that he's a drug smuggler. As a respectable businessman, it will be in your best interest to immediately have that cleared up. So if before 2016 he was trying, and then it was not very imperative for him probably at that time, but there comes a time when you really have to have your name cleared, especially
Okay.
at that environment. So he
Okay.
asked attorney de Vera to contact Rappler, and then that's
Yes.
how they started with the presentation of PIDEA clearance.
Yes, yes, we read that in the verdict. My next question is, why did you not run after Philippine Star, who was in fact the source of Mr. Santos in putting together the story about the relationship between former Chief Justice Corona and Mr. Keng?
No,
Why did you not run after Philippine Star?
No, the tie-up between Mr. King and the former Chief Justice first appeared in the Raptor article. The 2002 Philippine Star article, which was on print newspaper,
Yes.
it only referred to the allegations that Mr. King was involved in the unfortunate death of the former Manila City
Chicago.
Councilor,
Yes.
at Chicago, and then
Bakit yun hindi nyo hinabla?
at
Kasi
that time,
murder din yun.
yes,
Tapos
sir.
yes.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. At that time, it was print media. Mr. Keng believed at that time, he was also interviewed at that time. And then he was able to say that there was no investigation at all. And as far as he was concerned, that was cleared. And he was not probably afraid of print media because he understands that after a news cycle, after all the copies of that print newspaper has gone, then there's no more story. But in this case, the difference in the reach and scope, the pervasiveness of online publication is not comparable really to the reach and scope of a print newspaper. So if your name is maligned in a medium that can be reached worldwide, it could probably be reached in the International Space Station if they have internet signal there, then there's more necessity for a person to clear his name.
If it
And
was
Mr.
just
Cruz, Mr. Cruz, in the end, the judge herself said that the case is not one involving the government or any of its officials as complainants. So even the judge is making that a point. However, I have to ask you this: is Mr. Keng in any way associated with anybody in government? Does he know the president or anybody else higher up?
To my knowledge, no. In fact, there was an article linking him to the Chinese businessman who I think donated a drug rehab facility somewhere in Nueva Ecija, and then on the same article,
Mhm.
the president was also present during that ceremony. But as far as I'm concerned, I think probably that was the only time that they were in the same place together.
Yes, sir.
Um,
Well, I had to ask that question because some people are making connections. Like, for example, in 2019 October, the president
yes,
appointed Mr. Keng's
Patricia.
daughter Patricia as a member of the Philippine Commission on Women.
Can I
I
pick
So
up
am
on
some
not
people are making those connections.
yeah?
Yes.
Can I pick up
okay.
on this point? The fact that yeah, if Mr. Keng's daughter was indeed appointed, I don't think that is relevant because what is involved here is Mr. Keng's willingness to vindicate his reputation. So the government, they keep going back to this issue. If the case was influenced by the government, the simple answer is that it is not. It is a personal case to Mr. Keng.
Mm.
Hey,
If
Mr. Knight, I think Ed raised the point not so much to say that it's relevant to the case, but specifically to ask if Mr. King knows anybody in government. And that's the context as to why we are asking. If you're saying that no, he doesn't know anything, he doesn't know anyone in government, but at the same time, his daughter is appointed. What's the truth here? I mean, how does it? I mean, we're not saying that the appointment is relevant to that case. We just want to know the basic truth, because the assertion of people defending Rappler is that we cannot take away the context of President Duterte's uh, real anger towards Rappler, and he's very overt, very explicit about it. We can't take away that context. So we just want to know, I mean, kilala niya ba o hindi? Because na-appoint yung anak niya eh.
Okay. Yung pagkakakilala niya kay President Duterte, I don't think he knows the president personally. And I'm glad that you brought that up, the connection with president. You mentioned the ire of the president towards Rappler. Let's look at the timeline. When did the president actually express his ire towards Rappler? I think in a previous interview, Maria Ressa said that it was during the State of the Nation address in 2017, which would happen in July of 2017. But when did Mr. Keng actually start writing Rappler to have the article corrected? This happened in August of 2016, 11 months before the president supposedly expresses displeasure toward Rappler. And earlier I heard that Ms. Ressa said that there has been a slew of cases against Rappler beginning 2018. So the slew of cases in 2018 actually comes after the very early request of Mr. Keng to have his name clean, to have his records rectified, to have the article published saying that the Philippine Drug Enforcement Agency has not found him liable or has investigated, much less charged him for any offense involving drugs.
Okay, let's reverse the question then. Could it be that the government was using Mr. Keng's case to build a case against Rappler? If you're saying that the calendar, that the timetable seemed to show that all the cases against Maria were filed long after you had filed the libel case. Could it have been that the case was being used, although unwittingly on your part, perhaps? But is it possible that
Well,
it was used?
I don't think so. If you look at the cases filed by the government against Maria Ressa, these are, I believe, tax evasion cases or violation of its franchise for issuing Philippine depository receipts. The evidence that you will require in prosecuting those cases would not need any of the evidence. It would not have the same issues as the one raised in this libel case. So whether or not we win in the libel case will not have any effect on the other cases filed by the government. They could not
Yeah, but
use, they could not ride on the
yeah,
shoulders of any progress that we can have in this cyber libel case. This cyber libel case, again, if you notice, the judgment did not even find a corporate liability for Rappler as an entity. It just said it confined the liability to Ms. Maria Ressa as editor-in-chief or as executive editor, and Mr. Reynaldo Santos as the actual writer of the article. So I could not see how it could be tied to any conspiracy of government. Actually, as a lawyer personally, we feel that our efforts are being watered down, are being cheapened by these allegations. It's like
yeah,
saying that everybody else is playing for second place because we already know that we've won. I don't think that's fair. And secondly,
yeah,
I heard Ms. Ressa say that there is participation of the Department of Justice in the prosecution of this case. It is a basic legal principle in the Philippines that any criminal case is actually prosecuted in the name of the people of the Philippines. So therefore, the
yes,
Department of
yes.
Justice will always be involved.
Attorney Andaya, I'd like to bring you in. I mean, it's good that Attorney Cruz mentioned the DOJ, because that's one of the things. We're not saying that you can answer the speculation of the public with regards to conspiracy, but you understand that's one of the things that's fueling the questions and the suspicions of the people, the conspiracy on the politics and so on. And one of the concrete things that they point to and they ask, is that just a coincidence? Was the NBI, a unit of the NBI, not the NBI yet, basically making an initial recommendation and an initial finding na this should be dismissed because hindi ito aabutin ng prescription for the law. And then 1 week later, the NBI basically ignores that recommendation and files, and the DOJ continues with the case, notwithstanding the initial finding and recommendation that this case should not move forward. Can you speak to what happened there between the NBI and the DOJ?
If I understand it correctly from the decision, I think this was passed upon by the judge, that there was, I think, a memorandum that circulated in the NBI, but this was merely an internal memorandum. So
Yes.
this does not bind the the court.
Yes.
So we can proceed forward with the case.
Right.
Actually, it was an internal recommendation by the legal department of the National Bureau of Investigation. But we know that the legal department is not the NBI. The decision of the NBI actually falls on its executive head, which is the NBI director, who is also a lawyer.
It's only
The finding was the recommendation of the legal department that the cases actually prescribed did not consider the 2014 as a republished article. In fact, there's a recent decision of the Supreme Court, although it's a minute decision, it's a 2018 case, which has said that because of the new Cybercrime Prevention Act, the penalty has actually increased. And because of the increase in penalty, the prescriptive period has also correspondingly increased. If you look at the cases of Dicini versus Secretary of Justice, these were the concerns of former Chief Justice Sereno in her dissenting opinion. And in the motion for reconsideration of that same case, the Ponencia has ruled, has said that the Congress itself has the prerogative to increase the penalty and, of course, the prescriptive period, because in its wisdom, it realized the pervasiveness of the reach of cyberspace, of the internet. So, if we want government conspiracy, then you should bring in Congress also for passing the law that increase the penalty, that also increase the prescriptive period. And earlier it was mentioned that there's a conspiracy that's fueling this debate. But who is actually fueling this theory of conspiracy? I think if we just look at the article itself, without having any other discussion, I think any person would not contest the fact that being called a murderer, a drug trafficker, a human smuggler, a libelous, statement.
Attorney, okay, so what do you have to say about the verdict itself, calling Maria Ressa's change, which is not really a change, or use of her title as executive editor, a clever ruse?
Okay.
Because to begin with, you did not accuse all the others in the editorial board. You basically just filed a case against Mr. Santos and Maria Ressa.
With that
Okay.
with that scheme of Rappler, it's very easy to evade liability. That's why I think the judge mentioned that it was a clever ruse. Because if they could not present who the editor is, who can we hold liable in cases such as this? So I think that is why the judge said it was a clever ruse.
But why single out Maria? Why not?
For example, why not the managing editor who runs the day to day, for example, or the head of the investigative team? These are people that are not as well known as Maria, of course, but they're the ones who directly handle the story.
All right. We have to go back to the proceedings in the Department of Justice here, which held the preliminary investigation. During the hearing, during the preliminary investigation, we actually tried to include as respondents all the editorial board, which for our purposes, because we do not know exactly who they are, we included all the board members of the board of directors of Rappler Inc. And during the preliminary investigation, it was the decision of the Department of Justice investigating committee. It was not the decision of the private prosecutors. It was the decision of the DOJ, who who was conducting the preliminary investigation, that probable cause was clear with the writer, Mr. Reynaldo Santos, and the executive editor. Being the executive editor, they compared it to be no different than the editor-in-chief of a regular publication that would be presumed to conclusively know what is going on inside that publication. The Department of Justice said that no conclusive evidence was shown that the other directors of the board are necessarily the editors also, that they also have a say in the management and control of the of Rappler. In fact, during the trial itself, Miss Chai Hofelena, when she testified, the judge asked her, in case of tie among the decisions of the board, who is the tiebreaker? And she said it would be Miss Maria Ressa. So it is clear that the buck stops with Miss Maria Ressa being not just the figurehead, but the chief executive officer and administrator of Rappler. And that position is no different from an editor-in-chief.
Okay. So I'd like to talk about the things that this now lays down, particularly the concept of republication. It basically says, and that's our perception of it, doesn't have to be anything substantive. In this case, it was a typo. It was one letter literally changed. And on that basis, this was now deemed as published. For the guidance of newsrooms out there, including the newsrooms that we run, what exactly is the finding here? How should we be guided by what you now have established with your case on the matter of republication, and for that matter, on the theory of continuing publication?
Okay, let us be clear first. We have never alleged that this is a continuing publication. I think that is different from a republication. Continuing publication presupposes that as long as a document exists, it is published, and then every time that document is accessed by anybody, it starts a new prescriptive period. What we have been relying on are the two decisions of the Supreme Court. One, Soriano versus Intermediate Appellate Court, and then the Brillantes case. The Soriano case mentions republication is the rule, mentions that republication is the rule in Philippine jurisprudence. What does republication mean? It means that you have a previously published article, and then you publish exactly the same article in the same platform at a different time. So that different time constitutes another publication. In the case of Brillantes, the multiple publication rule refers to the number of publications the same article appeared in the same time. So I think in that case, it was about a Makati politician who was claiming, who made some libelous remarks against the complainant in that case. And it was picked up by the different media entities who published the same in the respective newspapers. So for every newspaper that it was published, that was one count of republication. It said it appeared from a single white paper that was republished in different publications. In fact, the news personalities in the case of Brillantes were eventually acquitted because they're saying they're reporting on something of political importance, which is the local politics in Makati City. And then going back to the Soriano case, which was analogous to this case, which was the basis for this case, you have the same article published in the same platform at another time. It actually is curious why they would use the word update when they themselves say it's just one letter that they changed. So using the word update encourages a reader to look at the article again. That is an active act of republication because you could have actually used the word erratum. You could have written a small note at the bottom. The word evasion was misspelled and it is hereby being corrected. Sorry for the typo.
Yeah, but I can tell you, sir, that the word update is not chosen by the editors. It is not an editorial call. As somebody who's edited an online news site, I can tell you that it's a function of the technology. I make a correction. I know the program itself is the one that says this was published back then and it was updated on this particular time. That's not an editorial call. It's not as if they're trying to deceive anyone. And with regards to the why not just say erratum? Is that what we're saying? That you should have just said erratum instead of updating? In any case, the question here is What was the substance that changed? Nothing changed. And that's what we're concerned about. I can now imagine a lot of newsrooms, a lot of editors-in-chief, counterparts of Maria Ressa, telling their the counterparts of Mr. Rey Santos, from now on, do not edit any article prior to 2012. Isn't that chilling effect?
No, that's not a chilling effect, because if you said it's a function of technology, then it's easily corrected. If what happened here is, in the trial of a case, you use the words in their ordinary meaning. So if you use update, no testimony was offered by Ms. Maria Ressa or Mr. Rey Santos. That would have been the opportunity to explain to the court that update is a technological function. But then again, when their witness testified that it was corrected, she said the court found that it did not even matter, because in the principle of republication, even if you publish the exact same article at a different time, it constitutes republication. So when when the document was updated, it inspires a belief in the person reading it that there is something significantly new with that article. So it's an invitation to look at the article again, which the court um, treated as a republication, and which was our position from the beginning.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Cruz and Attorney Cruz and Attorney Andaya, what's next from your end? We can be certain almost that Maria Ressa will be filing an appeal. Do we still expect anything from your end?
Yeah, we still have to consult with our legal team and also with our client. But if in the event that Ms. Ressa and Mr. Santos will decide to appeal, and then we will be here for Mr. Keng to continuously protect his reputation and his rights.
Okay, maraming
Okay.
salamat po, Attorney Ryan Cruz and Attorney Melissa Andaya, the lawyers of Mr. William Keng. Thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Salamat po.
Good night.
And that will be all for this edition of the Chiefs. We will discuss here. We'll keep the conversation going. I'm Adlinga of One News.
I'm Lucy Cruz Valdez of News 5.
I'm Robbie Alampay. We are One News.